Welcome to Bloomberg Green, and welcome back to the Zero podcast.
Fantastic to be with you.
Now, last time we talked, about 2 years ago, India and Pakistan were going at it at the World Cup. And you were celebrating the US having passed the largest climate legislation ever passed. Now, there's good news and bad news. The good news is India has actually won a World Cup since then.
But who's keeping score?
Right? And Pakistan, well, has had a few climate impacts. And the other bad news is, well, Trump is coming to power. And we don't know whether the largest climate bill that the Biden administration was able to pass will be able to get all the money, all the incentives that it has out the door. How worried are you?
I am less worried than you might think I am. And it's because in the architecture of our climate strategy, we anticipated a handoff to the private sector to carry us the distance. I think of the Inflation Reduction Act, the bipartisan infrastructure law, as the booster packs on a rocket, but the rocket is the private sector. And I think what we will see next year and the years after is that during this period of time, we were able to achieve escape velocity in the United States on critical areas of decarbonization. I am worried about parts of the inflection point which to me feel very fragile. One of them is our ability to sustain the manufacturing renaissance that's taken off in the United States. We know that federal policy is so critical to incubating that industrial capacity build out. And in a couple of key areas, I think we might fall back if policy is reversed course.
So the Trump administration is promising to cut taxes, and that means it's going to have to try and find money from places. I know that there is a lot of money from the Inflation Reduction Act that's going to go to Republican states. That might stick around. But there are certain types of incentives that might actually be cut immediately or maybe phased down sooner than planned. A couple of them that come to mind: electric vehicle tax credits might go altogether. The clean electricity tax credit might be phased down early. Do you think those two sectors have met this rocket escape velocity that you hope?
Well, look, I think that the American people are very focused, and rightfully so, on pocketbook issues, including the cost of energy. Those electricity tax credits are tax cuts that flow through to utility payers who now see lower energy bills. You can literally go to utilities around the country where they will tell you how much the price of electricity came down and how much families are benefiting because of investments from the Inflation Reduction Act. So I think it would be problematic, not from just a climate perspective, but from a retail economics perspective, if there were to be a reversal on that. On your point about is it easy to undo this, look, 9 out of every $10 from the grant side of our investment agenda is in some form or fashion already into the economy. Most of the tax credits, 21 out of 24, have some guidance associated with them and are moving forward. And, you know, I believe, and I think this is manifest in the politics in Washington, that we have grown the political consensus around the Inflation Reduction Act through its execution, which evidence point one is the letter from House Republicans to their own leader saying, hey, let's stop trying to repeal something that would unplug a bunch of jobs and economic opportunity in our districts.
Well, ideology has never been more powerful in American politics than it is perhaps now, or at least in recent history, perhaps it is now. We are starting to see some of the Trump administration's appointees, and what we are noticing is that last time around, there was perhaps a little bit of ineffectiveness because the people who had been appointed did not know all the ways in which they could get their ideology deployed. This time around, we expected many more people to be people who know the rules, who know how to break the rules. But there are also a lot of loyalists being put. And so there are wildcards that could be coming your way. Aren't you worried about those?
Look, if you work on climate change, you're always counting on there being wild cards. But I think there's a real robustness in the system. The first part we talked about already, and that's the private sector and the role it's going to play in, I think, continuing to pull the policy certainty along. They have made $1 trillion worth of investment bets predicated on a policy regime. They're not going to want to see the rug pulled out from underneath
Well,
that.
we had the ExxonMobil CEO yesterday telling us that the US should not pull out of the Paris Agreement.
Yeah, and that's not your most obvious ally in this fight, but not only calling for staying in Paris, but also calling to keep intact the incentives that have been put in place. So I think there's that piece of it. I think the robustness also comes from state policy. You've got more than half of the states that have Democratic leadership and very much engaged in advancing clean energy. But that actually ignores the fact that you have a bunch more Republican governors whose entire economic theory rests on investments from the Inflation Reduction Act. You go to a place like Oklahoma, Governor Stitt, an amazing leader in attracting private investment to his state. Most of that private investment is clean energy. Governor Kemp in Georgia, most of that investment, clean energy. Go to South Carolina, Governor McMaster, most of that new investment, clean energy. So if you want to see the politics of this, you look at the House where they've written to their leader, you look at the private sector where they've put the bet on clean energy future, you look at the states where they're continue to run towards clean energy. This is actually a much more robust system with a lot more momentum behind it than we had in 2017. So I hear you on the risk factors, but I'm focused on the incredible momentum, and I think that's where I put my stock.
Now let's look at the international front. We are here at COP29. Negotiators are going to have to battle out something that is perhaps going to be the hardest thing that many experts are saying since the Paris Agreement, because it's all about money, and especially rich countries, especially the US, does not like to talk about money as much when it comes to hundreds of billions of dollars that need to be given to developing countries. Before we get into the details, the first thing that's going to happen is that Donald Trump says he's going to pull the US out of the Paris Agreement again. Let's see if he listens to the ExxonMobil CEO.
Yeah.
But if he doesn't, that means the US is not party to negotiations within 1 year of him making that decision. And that creates a credibility gap right now in these really difficult negotiations. Are the other negotiators taking you and your colleagues seriously?
I think the U.S. has built up quite a bit of credibility over the last 4 years, including an announcement I made today about a $3 billion target that the president had set in 2021 to mobilize adaptation finance into the developing world, the PREPARE initiative. We actually met that goal a year early, and we'll meet it again next year. But, you know, I would be sugarcoating it if I suggested that U.S. leadership going into next year from the federal government has a bright and positive halo around it in global climate conversations. I think people hear what has been said, they read what has been written, and they largely believe it. And as a result, that, I think, diminishes the U.S. federal position as the rules are being written on the clean energy economy of the future. And that comes to the detriment of U.S. businesses and U.S. workers. So I think that's a problem if we don't sort of see this through. In terms of the conversation that's happening right now, it's all about bringing more countries in around an ambitious target for 2035, which is quite a ways away. I think the bigger that coalition is and the bolder that ambition is, the more likely, if that might be counterintuitive, but the more likely we are to pull through on the other side and deliver the resources that are necessary to lift up the entire world in adapting to these challenges.
Why is that? Why do you think a bigger target will make it easier given the US is likely to leave?
I think if it is a target that is fit to purpose, that actually meets the moment, there will be more of a pull to get it done. If it's, an anemic target, I think that makes it less exciting for people to really put their weight behind it. And I think the broader the coalition, the more likely it is that, when one country falls back, the others pick up the slack, and so on and so forth. We pull each other through in the end.
But the Biden administration under the president has not been able to meet all the many commitments on the international front. So the Green Climate Fund was supposed to get $3 billion. It's only got $2 billion. Are you going to fill that gap before the president leaves the White House?
The president made an overarching commitment on climate finance, $11 billion. And that was something the vice president talked about in Dubai when she was there. And a nested element of that is the $3 billion I just talked about. I have all the confidence in the world that the U.S. will be able to meet that overarching target, which when it was set, I think surprised everybody, felt like an ambition well beyond business as usual. And I think if we're able to deliver that, able to close that out, that will show the seriousness with which this administration has tried to pursue these objectives.
And if we look a little bit beyond COP29 till you still are in power, there is a big requirement under the Paris Agreement where countries have to submit their new climate pledges that will go out, as you said, till 2035. The US, as the world's second largest emitter, and what it decides in those pledges, even if it eventually leaves, that decision will make a big impact on how other countries follow through. So this nationally determined contribution, as it is called, what are you going to put in it that will make sure it matches the language that was signed off on at COP28 on transitioning away from fossil fuels?
Yeah, look, as we approach this, and this has been an analytical project that we've been undertaking with the entire federal government over the past year, one of the things that we're looking at is how does it carry forward all of the elements of what was decided in Dubai, including the need to remain tightly aligned with 1.5 degrees and keeping that in our sights. On fossil, one of the things that I think we've tried to do pretty effectively in the United States is really bring a screen to long life infrastructure and think about how what we are building either matches or does not match that test of 1.5 degree alignment. I'm not here to roll out the nationally determined contribution, so you'll have to stay tuned. But the analysis and the work that we've been doing has both been looking at what Dubai called for and what we are committed to, as well as what is really incredible momentum from state and local governments and the private sector, and sort of runaway techno-economics that support greater and greater ambition in this space.
Say it comes before January 20th, this nationally determined contribution. Even on current trajectory, and even if all the policies that are in place stay intact, the US is not on track to meet its 2030 goals. You're going to have to, as a science-based target, set more ambitious goals going out to 2035. And then Trump is coming to power, and he's likely to roll back many of these initiatives. So what leaves the US with credibility at the end of that administration, or even as you submit this climate pledge? Is it just back to the old days of do what we say, not as we do?
I think if you look at the targets the U.S. has set in previous NDCs and our track record, notwithstanding zigs and zags in political leadership in Washington, what you see is that the combination of the federal government working with state and local governments and the private sector have been able to meet those goals. 2010 effort, 2015. Some of the domestic, set aside the NDC, some of the domestic regulations that we set, including for the power sector during the Obama administration, that were rolled back. We ended up actually exceeding those from a performance perspective in the power sector. As I look out to 2025, 2030, 2035, I have confidence that we will continue to set and meet targets, notwithstanding shifts in politics. It's not helpful, don't get me wrong, it is not helpful to have potentially a period of time where the federal government is either trying to slow or stymie the progress. What we actually need to be doing right now is investing more in things like our industrial capacity being cleaner and more competitive, our agricultural sector being more resilient and more competitive. If we fail to do that, we will have missed a massive economic opportunity. But if you look backwards, I think that gives you a hopeful track record and data points to project forward. I think we can, in fact, keep ratcheting up.
One reason why the Inflation Reduction Act has some more teeth than would have been otherwise is because there was recognition from the Republican side that China is eating the US lunch when it comes to green technologies. This next 4 years are likely going to grow that gap, even with the Inflation Reduction Act staying as it is, as you would hope it stays. What happens when you come back, say, in 2028 as a Democratic president back in power, and the gap between the US and China is bigger when it comes to green technologies? How do you catch up?
If 4 years from now we have fallen further behind China, I think that's economic malpractice at the federal policy level. I think the science is not unsettled on climate change, and yet folks articulate it as a matter of belief. But even if you set that aside, the economics are clear. These are technologies invented in the United States. When we invest in their manufacturing capability and deploy them domestically, there is unambiguous economic upside and energy security upside. It would be economic malpractice to put us back in the position we were 4 years ago, where we were in a massive deficit in the leadership of these technologies. So I understand your question, which is what happens if that deficit exists. I don't know if we come out of the ditch. So I'm actually I'll root for anybody who puts America's economic interests first. And I'm going to root for the next Congress, the next administration, finding a way, whether it's motivated by climate or not, to invest in our industrial strength and invest in our energy security and invest in our ability to make the technologies that we pioneered in the United States, make them cheaper, make them better, and help them translate into jobs and economic opportunity.
So far, what the Trump administration has said is there's going to be an energy czar in the White House, not a climate czar. So what happens after January? You're taking part and becoming part of the resistance, which was created after the first Trump administration?
Well, the good news is I won't get shown up by the next climate czar. No, I am eager to be part of civil society and to root for the success of a country I love, and to find a way to plug into the imperative of our times, which is that we rise to meet the moment on climate change. Whether or not Joe Biden is in office or Donald Trump is in office or whomever, we are in the decisive decade for climate action. Climate action is not on pause over the next 4 years. It's on all of us to figure out how we accelerate progress at home and abroad on that.
Thank you, Ali.
Thank you.